Recall expands to include 7 million pounds of deli
Nearly
meat.
150 sick in salmonella outbreak affecting 11
Coli
countries.
outbreak in the U.S. kills 10 and sickens hundreds.
All these headlines about food safety. This isn't just policy, it's personal. Behind every recall, every outbreak, and every regulation, there's someone whose life was permanently changed or lost. I know that because I am one of them.
Welcome to Confessions of a Food Safety A-Hole. I'm Gennette Zimmer.
And I'm Dr. Darin Detweiler, former submarine guy, longtime food safety advocate, author, and someone who's been speaking up for over 3.5 decades, even when it wasn't easy or popular.
This isn't your average food safety podcast. We're not talking about bacteria and best practices. We won't be teaching you the proper temperature to cook a chicken breast.
165.
Or even how to pronounce Listeria monocytogenes.
Not even close.
We're diving into the culture, the conflicts, and the human cost of getting it wrong.
We'll share stories, some painful, some funny, all true. Revealing the real experiences of someone who's spent a lifetime behind the scenes.
These aren't stories you read about in newspapers or magazines, and they're not found on conference agendas. What they are everyday experiences of people who have dedicated their lives to making sure you have access to safe food.
Because when it comes to protecting every plate, it's not just policy and data. It's personal. And it's time we start talking about it like it is.
Welcome back to Confessions of a Food Safety A-Hole. We're so thrilled to talk to our special guest today. We managed to score somebody really awesome.
Woohoo!
Yep.
My name is Bill Marler. I'm an attorney based on Bainbridge Island, Washington. I've been doing food safety cases since the Jack in the Box outbreak in 1993.
Yes, that's right. You heard it correctly. We got Bill Marler to sit down and talk to us about accountability. And we'll play later on this discussion. But before that, Darin and I just wanted to kind of give you a brief idea of some of the thoughts that we had about accountability. Now, Darin and I just wanted to give you a couple of thoughts about accountability and, you know, kind of where our head was at when we decided we wanted to have this conversation.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. As a professor, I look at certain things a certain way. As a consumer, as a parent, as a husband, just as a being, as a member of a democratic society, right? You can't help but think about accountability, and then you start thinking responsibility and ethics and transparency. There's so many words that are kind of within that kind of bubble cloud of they're similar, they're in the same category or whatever.
Yes.
And sometimes it gets confusing, like what we think everyone defines accountability as, like this one singular definition, we come to find out, no, it's not really.
Yeah.
Do you remember when we were kids?
Sometimes.
but specifically, Schoolhouse Rock.
Oh, yeah. Nobody can not remember Schoolhouse Rock. That was all over the place.
Oh, yeah. In between,
even for me, who really didn't watch much TV as a child, knew the songs from Schoolhouse Rock.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was like it was almost like an infomercial for an important concept to learn.
Yes.
Like conjunctions and
Yes.
adverbs and I'm just a barrel
Yep.
sitting on Capitol Hill.
Yep.
That's my impression of it, by the way. But I wish there was one for accountability.
How do you think that would go?
I think that it would have been broad in terms of they're not aiming it towards food industry executives. How are we accountable, whether we're a student or a worker or a parent but I think that, the idea of accountability could have been, so what's interesting is they call them soft skills now. We're not talking about typing and making videos or whatever.
Right,
the idea
right.
of communication and accountability. There's companies that, you may have a degree in this, but if you can't be held accountable for something, or you've never been held accountable for something, then that's not the employee that they really want to have.
Right.
Kind of a deal. But I
Right.
think that accountability is a defining principle of effective leadership.
Yeah.
And any industry.
Yeah, I agree. So would you say that is the overarching how you define accountability?
Well, I think in a bigger context, it extends beyond just meeting production targets or even protecting brand reputation, but it requires responsibility and transparency, integrity, and even stewardship at every level of decision making.
Yeah, integrity is one of those that I'm constantly baffled by the lack of it in a lot of the stuff that we see going on these days.
Oh, and what amazes me is that it's amazing how the people say, we have accountability, we have transparency, we have integrity, are sometimes demonstrating that
They have none at all.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost if they're projecting.
Yeah.
That they're blaming other people for the things that they do.
Yes.
But it's like, but you do them. So
Right.
how do you define this, right?
Right.
Because it's not just about being answerable to your leadership or your shareholders, but whether it's regulators, employees, consumers, even communities, right? We've seen where leaders who were not being held accountable because not their own decision in some cases, they weren't held accountable because the metrics to determine their annual Christmas bonus never actually measured that and accounted for that.
Yeah.
And little side note, Peanut Corporation of America, you look at accountability, but if you look at Chipotle and accountability, I'm still blown away by the fact that the guy who was the CEO of Chipotle during the time of the first year of that major outbreak,
Mm-hmm.
he still got his $15 million annual bonus for
Right.
Christmas because all those things that went wrong were not things that were part of the metrics in terms of evaluating his performance.
Right. Right.
So if you're not being held accountable,
Why should
That's-
you even bother?
why be accountable if you're not being held accountable?
Right. Right. How do you think it should be functioning, or do you think it's even close to functioning the way it should?
I definitely think that, for instance, there's been many conversations over the last 3 decades about how, and this is what's surprising to some people, there were no state or federal charges filed against executives at the Jack in the Box company,
Mm-hmm.
even though they admitted their guilt in violating some laws that resulted in not only hundreds of illnesses and hospitalizations, but the deaths of 4 children, obviously including my son. The conversation has been around the idea of if they had been held accountable, imagine the message that would have sent
Back
to
then.
industry back then. Yeah, it's like one of those parallel universe things.
Mhm.
Imagine where there's a universe where they were held accountable and food safety culture is vastly different today as a result of that from 1993. But we're in a universe where they were not held accountable, and we have to look at other examples. And you can go and look at the Peanut Corporation of America in terms of, okay, well, they were held accountable. Yeah, there's a lot of people that say that, yeah, and that made a big impact at the time, but we seem to have just kind of moved on.
Mm-hmm.
And are we even any better as a result of that today?
Well, I even said, to me, it seemed like everybody in the food safety industry thought this was going to be this huge message and a wake-up call to the leaders, and all it seemed to do from my perspective, as not an expert or anything, but from my perspective, just taught them, okay, what do I need to do to make sure that I don't be held to the same standards that they got held to? What do I need to do? Who do I need to pay? What's going on in that way? How do I pretend that everything was somebody else's fault?
Yeah.
Anyway,
It's tough too because I have to insert something before we move on.
sure.
There are really good examples of companies that do accept the responsibility and they hold themselves accountable. There are great examples of leaders and of companies that have never just moved on from a failure. They accept the responsibility, they learn from it, they make sure that their company will always be impacted by what happened then, and it drives their true not only acceptance, but the responsibility they hold on to and how they go forward and not avoiding it or or quote unquote reinventing the truth, to reinvent the legacy of that event. We're starting to see that more and more, where companies just kind of don't acknowledge this, or they don't address this, and they act as if, oh, the consumers are just going to forget and move on, and we'll forget and move on. But okay, but then we see you have more failures and more failures, and it's like, you did not learn the lesson, right? There's a lot of respect that people within the food safety profession and network hold for great leaders and great companies that provide examples of true accountability and responsibility and integrity and transparency and holding on to the idea of, this was the past, our future can be different. Here's how we navigate our legacy going forward.
Right.
Which is a far cry from, well, navigating our legacy going forward is just going to be to forget.
Not only forget, or just completely rewrite.
Yeah. But I know that there's many people who have some thoughts on this.
Yep. Including Bill Marler. So let's play the interview that we had with him, because I thought it was pretty awesome.
Well, I hope you're sitting down and have your popcorn ready, because this is a bit of a journey of a conversation with him. We're going to be talking about a lot of different topics in terms of how to look at accountability. And when we're done, we're going to come back and
talk a little bit about what we heard.
We're gonna decipher and digest.
Yes, decipher and digest.
Okay, so I asked Darin specifically to see if you'd be willing to have a conversation with us in relation to this episode, because something that I've been like really curious about is accountability in the food safety space. That, the idea sort of generated from, I had heard somewhere after the radioactive shrimp from Walmart issue, and like, I don't know if you ever heard the song, but there was like a morning radio show in Wisconsin that had created a, the song Video Killed the Radio Star?
Right.
Yeah, so they basically overdubbed it with radioactive shrimp from Walmart, and people on TikTok were going crazy with it. So Walmart, of course, was being held accountable to a certain degree just by the public social media realm. And also I had heard or read somewhere about how the Indonesian fishermen were also getting really raked over the coals for it. But if I understand correctly, the radioactive material actually was from the shipping of it was not necessarily the fishermen who did anything wrong. It was the shipping company that exposed the shrimp to the radiation. And to me, it was like, I haven't heard anything about that. They haven't been held accountable at all. And it just kind of got to, in my head, this whole wider discussion of accountability. And, I specifically wanted you because you work in a profession that is all about either A, holding somebody accountable, or B, trying to avoid accountability in my eyes,
Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah.
So so I was just curious, A, your take on that particular case, but also just your take on the kind of accountability since the big case in 1993 going forward.
Yeah. It's a, I don't know, the shrimp thing, you probably would have had to eat 50 pounds of shrimp a day for your entire life to cause a problem. So, I kind of, to me, the kinds of stuff that, Darin and I have dealt with for the last 30 plus years, sort of a more immediate, in my view.
Yes.
But I think the bigger question about accountability, and especially as it relates to, a lawyer, I have to tell you that I thought after the Jack in the Box case, that I thought that holding them economically accountable would change the industry's behavior change, not just the beef industry, but all industries. Somehow I thought, excuse me, magically, you know, people would start being responsible. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, as we all know, that didn't happen at all. And
Yeah.
and I started questioning like whether or not what I was doing was really actually that useful. you
Mm.
know, yeah, I could make sure that people were quote unquote compensated. And, that's certainly my primary job. But, when you get to know somebody like Darin and you get to know somebody like the Kiner family and, all the folks that I'd met in the first several years of my practice, you realize that, it doesn't really matter how much money you get them. I mean, yeah, they deserve to get something for what they've gone through. But if it also doesn't change, you know, the bad guy's behavior or the bad industry's behavior, it just seems like, what's the point? And it was kind of at that point, and probably it was in the, by the time the Odwalla case happened in '96, that I really started uh, going to conferences, both industry and government and NGO conferences to talk about like why it's a bad idea to poison people. Primarily because of two things. One, I think that's a reasonable thing to ask people to do, but
Right.
also I wanted to sort of make sure that these industries and these government entities and these trade groups and whatnot started to feel accountable for the people that actually it happened to. So I would tell
Mm.
stories about clients, I'd bring videos, I'd talk about cases, what I was able to find, how to embarrass, companies with, the documents that you get in discovery. I really tried hard to make people accountable. I'll tell you, in my mind, I had this vision. I wanted that to make it uncomfortable for the CEO of a business. So uncomfortable that when they went to their country club on a Saturday or Sunday and they're walk into the locker room, that others of their buddies had the New York Times opened or something, and it had like a headline, Bob Smith killed little children, and that
Right.
they would make him accountable by like going, Bob, what the hell are you doing killing little kids? And so that's where I started creating this sort of very disjointed, you know, law practice where, I spent 100% of my time being a lawyer fighting to compensate people. And I spent, 100% of my time, starting food safety news and blogging and, talking to media and going to conferences all over the world. Um, and the whole idea was to create incentives that really actually made companies change their behavior.
Yeah.
And, there were people like, Darin and other families, they started Stop and did other things. And you saw the, Center for Science of Public Interest and Stop and Consumer Reports and Pew. And you started to see sort of a synergy, and it's way slower than it should be. I mean, the fact that I have, meetings once every other week with a group of consumers talking about salmonella in poultry that we've been doing for, I can't even tell you how long we've been doing it.
Yeah.
But anyway, I sort of feel that I think the thing that we started talking about before we went on the air about, Frank Giannis's, op-ed or whatever they wanted to call it about how wonderful Boar's Head is. Um, you know, that's the kind of thing that allows companies to pat themselves on the back and ignore what they just did, you
Right.
know?
Instead of self-reflection.
And I think guys like Darin and I have a moral and ethical responsibility to make people accountable, and not in a
Mhm.
mean way, but
No.
it's like, you know, it's like, really? But you also see it in other things too. It's like, you know, one of the things I've been working on and Stop has been working on too is making things more transparent about when companies poison you. Why would the government hide that information from the public? Seems rather silly. Or one thing I'm working on too is, you know, and a great example is like the listeria outbreak linked to the supplement shakes. You know, 40 some odd people sick, 14 dead. I'm the only person in the country that represents somebody who actually has made a claim. And you're like, what? How could
How is
that
that
be?
possible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's possible because people in public health don't see it as their responsibility to tell people who they've taken cultures from, they've interviewed, they've taken their medical records, blah, blah, blah. They've asked them a billion questions. They don't see it as their responsibility to tell the widow of a man who died that the guy died from listeria from the shakes. I mean,
Mm.
the case that I have that I'm working on, the family had to be convinced that it wasn't boar's head.
Oh,
Yeah, they were convinced
because
it
it
was
was
board
happening around the same time.
same time. And they like, and I'm like, well, no, it's supplement shakes. No, it wasn't. It was boar's head. Well, it was supplement shakes. Whole genome sequence match. So, you know, there are things about the system that we move in and out of that creates this opaqueness and lack of transparency for either the purpose of insulating, you know, wrongdoers, or more importantly, sort of, you know, deciding that their information shouldn't be shared with victims because the victims might what? Hire a lawyer, or, you know, put up a website, or go to graduate school and get a PhD? I mean, you know, what's the point of like keeping that information secret from people?
Right.
And, you know, so there's a lot that is involved in accountability, and I sort of feel like, you know, I've done my 0.5% moving it in a positive direction.
You know, I'm drawn to thinking about how much effort Stuart Parnell's lawyers put in to try to prevent the victims and their families from speaking during the sentencing phase of the Peanut Corporation of America trial, and how if we allowed that very real human element of the story, it would make that accountability so much more real, you know.
Right.
And I'm glad ultimately the judge allowed for the victims and their families to testify during that period of time.
But they weren't allowed to, in fact, became big part of the evidence, a big part of the reason why there was appeal. They weren't allowed to say people died.
Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah.
getting to. It's like there's still
Yeah.
deniability in terms, or
Yeah.
denial in terms of the true accountability there.
And the reason why the court did that is the balance between prejudice is a prejudice issue. Is that fact important enough to like inflame the jury so they aren't rational? And you know that's one of those things. I would probably debate myself to death about whether or not what the court did in that instance was the right thing to do or not. There's no question in my mind, had the court let that information in about the deaths,
Right.
it's most likely Stuart and his brother would have never spent as much time in prison as they would, because I think a court would have found that it would have been too prejudicial.
But Bill, while
Interesting.
we talk about this, before we move on, I think it's important for the listeners of this podcast within this conversation to understand something. When we talk about the Peanut Corporation of America trial and the jury, right? How many hands, how many fingers would it take for you to count how many times this kind of a case plays out in front of a jury over the last 3 decades?
One finger.
Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly, and I've written about this God knows how many times, but, for every PCA, I could give you a list of 30 other companies that have done just as bad and have gotten nothing. Not, and some of them, the health department helps cover it up, or the FDA helps cover it up, and they
Yeah.
never get held accountable. Yeah, it's thank goodness for, at least some of us in the law doing what we do. Thank God for,
Hmm.
public advocates like Darin and others that, advocate for, victims and advocate for, transparency. But it's, there's a lot in the system that helps insulate people from exactly what you asked about, is accountability. People don't want to take responsibility for bad things. I mean, think about that. There are very few people that over the course of your life where something bad happened, they're like, hey, I did it. I got to be responsible. I'm going to fix the problem. I'm going to, you know, take care of the problem. And then I'm going to make sure it never happens again. And I'm going to advocate for it never happening again. That's a pretty rare situation in
Yeah.
anything, what food or you're backing into your neighbor's car. I mean, most people just like, I didn't do it. The wind did it. I don't want to deal with it. What happens is, um, you know, you, you, you don't learn from mistakes. You don't learn from bad behavior and tell people. I mean, so
I don't know. I mean, it's such a huge thing because you're right. People want to avoid taking any sort of responsibility for their mistakes. I mean, we also have a culture that kind of encourages it wasn't me, you know. There's a whole song about that. But
yeah.
so you started out your career thinking, okay, I'm going to hold them financially accountable, and that was not as effective as you hoped. And then we have, fast forward 30 years, we actually have a case where they're held criminally accountable and put into prison as a result. And that doesn't seem to have, because all that, from what I can see, has done is, oh, well, let's just throw some money at it to the government and we can get out of whatever we've done. That now they're just pay these huge fines, probably building them into their budgets. Oh, if we
Yeah.
mess up and we have to pay a fine, well, we're going to set aside X million dollars so that we can just pay it off and forget about it. And the people who made the decisions are not being held to any sort of standard. So where is that? I mean, I don't know if there's an answer, but where is that? Where, okay, we're ready to like re-look at how leaders in this industry are behaving and making decisions and putting profit over people.
Right.
Where does that happen?
So I think you have to go back to my example of, making people, you know, point at that CEO walking through the golf and country club, or, in the locker room at, getting ready to go golf, where people go, geez, that's the guy that killed a bunch of people. Or, gee, that's the guy that made a bunch of people sick. I mean, yeah, I completely agree with you that that, we're just not holding uh, people to the kind of, and I don't mean to sound like an old guy, but it's like, you know, if my mom and dad were around watching how little we are holding our leaders and others to account for
Mhm.
their behavior and what they say and what they do and how they act, my parents would like their heads would explode,
Yeah.
and frankly, my head explodes, and so, but I guess I've crossed over into the old guy category. But
Yeah.
the
His head
the fact
explodes too.
the fact is that, I mean, and this is not meant politically because it happens on either side of the political spectrum, but but and it's not like I'm like a prude about things, but I think there is kind of like right and wrong, I
Yeah.
mean, and I mean, I just remember how upset I was that Bill Clinton, lied about his relationship with, the intern. And I just remember, I mean, I was in college, I was in law school, and I just remember thinking about like, this guy should be impeached. He lied under oath. He should be
Right.
impeached. And now like that,
It's a Tuesday.
yeah, it's like what? And I think that's the sort of the again, I don't mean to get into like a debate about politics, but when you don't hold people accountable for what they did or how they've done it or how they've acted, and you just sort of move on, I think you debase what it means to be a good person. And I don't know why I think this is relevant, I mean, I look at like public health officials. I remember I represented, it was a small E. coli outbreak in College Station, Texas. It was a burrito place. And there were 10 people that got sick, two kids, both brothers, developed HUS, fortunately survived. Um, the head of public health held a press conference a week. The kids were still in the hospital. They were still on dialysis. And the head of public health had a press conference where he ate a burrito from the
Ugh.
rest. And you're like, and the whole idea was like, oh, it's okay it's safe. Let's go back to, and I'm like, what?
I remember
Are
that.
you, what? And and you see it with like a Congress member having, there was a E. coli outbreak linked to spinach and 205 people sick, five dead, 35 mostly women with acute kidney failure. And he has a spinach luncheon up on Capitol Hill to say how great spinach from the Salinas Valley is. I
Well, we
mean,
saw Ted Cruz go hang out with his friends at Bluebell Creameries and talk about how they're heroes in his state, you know?
yeah, I mean, I just think that we sort of miss the mark. And I think there's a balance between, you know, putting them as stocks, in the
Right.
public square. You guys are going to Massachusetts, like it's a great
Yeah.
place for
Yeah.
public squares and stocks. But
Yes.
I think there's a balance between going that far and just like sweeping it under the rug. And
Right.
I just think to me, that's what um, our job is, right? Our job is, right? My job, Darin's job, other people in this space, reporters, was to push so people become educated and accountable. And I'm not sure what more we can do, but I
Sure.
do believe that the times I've been with you, Darin, and we've talked about your story and we've talked about my admiration for you and what you've done. I think those have been some pretty powerful, opportunities. And like, people in that audience walk out of there going, I need to do a better job at my job. I need to make sure that Darin and Bill aren't talking about, or Darin and some other guy and Bill and some other guy aren't talking about my company, you know?
Mm,
So,
I I'm drawn to this thought about how when we really water down accountability, it almost normalizes denial from leaders.
but I mean, I don't know exactly what that is, what the evolutionary rationale for that human condition is, but
mm,
I can, in a weird way, I can kind of think I can kind of relate to it in the sense that I remember when I first started out as a young lawyer, I worked for a big law firm, and it was because I had lots of debt and I needed to make money, so I worked for a big law firm, and I represented asbestos companies, and
mm.
and I would take depositions of mesothelioma victims and their spouses of people who've died. And I remember about a year into it, talking to my then girlfriend, who's now my wife, talking to her about, like, you know, kind of like undercutting like who these people were that I was deposing, and going, claiming that they weren't worth what they were worth and that kind of stuff. And she goes, really? Really? And I'm like, I think I need to stop doing this kind of work. Because what was happening is I was trying to justify the fact of why I was an a-hole, why I was acting this way. It
Yeah.
wasn't me. It wasn't me. It was them. They were doing it. And I realized, and that's also part of being accountable, is like being able to stop yourself, or having someone who loves you stop yourself and go, hey, don't be an a-hole. Or if you're going
Yeah.
to be, be a good one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? So,
Yeah. Just add that bit of self-reflection, which does
yeah,
seem to not be particularly prevalent in our culture today,
right.
So
It's the underpinnings of, and this may sound ironic given the fact that we were talking about, um, Frank and what he just wrote. It's this whole sense of accountability and this whole sense of reflection. It's
yeah.
all part and parcel of the whole concept behind, food safety culture. You know,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
and if you pretend things don't happen, I think you're pretending that a food safety culture exists when it's doesn't really.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's that one point in Poison where I kind of tear up, and I'm like, I don't feel like I've done as much as I've could have done or should have done. And I guess, a lot of people go, that you shouldn't feel that way, but I do feel that way. I mean, I do feel like, I think that's not a bad thing to feel. I don't feel like I'm sitting around thinking I was been a failure. I just don't. I just think that I'd like to rewind this back, and there are things I would have. I think there are things that I would have pushed on harder and, like, not let up,
Mm,
and I think there are some things that, but it's also to hard to get all people moving in the same direction with the same level of passion,
yeah.
when they don't see the facts the same. And again, that has a lot to do with how we present accountability. So,
Well, I
Yeah.
I had a brief conversation with a guy who he is an orthopedic surgeon he's a pediatric orthopedic surgeon who specializes in putting back together the hands and feet or whatever of kids who crash on e-bikes.
oh,
And I know this is going to sound like totally unrelated, but what he said was so powerful in that there are some days he's glad that he's a specialist in what he does, but he really wishes he didn't have to do that.
yeah,
You
no,
know?
there's a part, yeah, definitely a part of of what I do. But now I've gotten actually so good at what I do that then I keep thinking, well, I've got to keep doing it because I'm actually pretty good at it. So
Yeah.
I feel the same way.
so so that's why now I'm completely rebuilt, and I'll keep moving on. So
Right
All
on.
right there, Lee Majors.
all right, see you guys. Yeah, exactly, and remember the man with the Trump hands. So all right, let's see you guys.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so
We'll see you
much.
soon.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a great conversation. It was a lot of fun. Plus, he's really fun to chat with. So that was a really good one. But I have one major conclusion that I'm going to start this whole conversation with.
Okay.
I conclude that the entire legal world of food safety and integrity rests on the MVP, who, in my opinion, is Julie Marler, for holding Bill accountable back then when he was a young lawyer and saying to him with love, "What are you doing?" I thought that was amazing because that made that man turn around, take a look at himself, and look at all the great things that he has done for the food safety realm as a result. So cheers to Julie Marler, who is, in my opinion, the MVP. But the conversation was amazing. I thought the optimism that he still shows and the realistic nature of what is happening, I really appreciated having both perspectives and just the different ways that he talked about things like wanting to use economic accountability. And when that wasn't working, he was working towards using the peer pressure for accountability. And, there's a lot of different things, but in all of that conversation, there were so many overarching themes
Oh, yeah.
that you were talking about to me late.
Yeah, I mean, I swear this could have been a conversation about corporate social responsibility. I mean, he hit economic responsibility, he hit ethical responsibility, he hit legal responsibility. There's still philanthropic responsibility. He talked about that in terms of what he does, like with Food Safety News and going to conferences and things outside of what a lawyer should have to do, kind of a thing, because it's all connected. Mm-hmm. And to me, when you talk about hope, in the face of this seemingly endless cycle of failure and reform and denial and issue, it's to me, it's kind of sobering when he and I were talking about how you kind of only need one finger in terms of pointing to a true court trial in which someone was truly held accountable for their actions.
A person, not just a company.
Exactly.
But actual people who were the ones who made the decision.
But also, there's a word. Did you catch this? There's a word he talked about. I think he mentioned it at least 3 or 4 times. Mm-hmm. About insulating. Right?
Yeah.
What's the purpose of some of this work? Is it there? Is it there to protect consumers, to protect a brand reputation, or there's those circumstances in which regulatory agencies, whether due to limited resources or even political pressures or institutional alignment with industry, that just effectively insulate companies and executives from meaningful consequences. Mm-hmm. And, this becomes a systemic issue that I don't think that we're efficiently addressing from time to enough, at least.
Yeah, I think so. And at the same time, with the options, the question of, am I doing enough? Well, you can only do as much as you can do. And that there is a point when other people also need to step up and do something to help build this accountability.
I really felt that when the conversation turned into that kind of sinking feeling of, am I doing enough? Mm-hmm. And you and I have talked about how I feel that pressure a great deal of times. And I've had to look at it in terms of awareness, alliance, advocacy, and activism. Mm-hmm. That if you're always feeling that you have to advocate or even be the activist for every issue, well, you can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had to accept that sometimes just being aware of something, that's all I was supposed to do. Or supporting and being an ally to those who are going to be the advocates, that's all I'm supposed to do. And I know that he does that. He and I talk regularly. We meet up in person. We have plenty of opportunities to be on stage together. And he might not use those words, but he really supports a lot of allies in many different ways. And he brings about awareness. I'm sure he's aware of a lot more things than I'm aware of in certain areas. And yes, we have both taken on that kind of pillar of being advocates or activists, but you have to kind of say, I can only be effective with this right now. At another time, I might be effective being the advocate for that.
Right.
But I'm going to do what I can for this. And yeah, it's great being part of a network of people. I could literally we could spend an entire episode just naming people.
Names, yeah. Of really, really strong advocates and activists for all of this realm.
And you know what? If it wasn't for them, I think that I would feel like Tom Hanks on Castaway, the idea that I'm alone on this island and that now this is futile. I'm just struggling. I'm not thriving. I'm struggling to survive and doing what I do.
Right.
But because of all these people that we network and we talk and we write and we speak and we sometimes we laugh together. Sometimes we financially support each other. Sometimes whatever it is,
right.
You feel like you can have a sense of thriving in the success and the achieving goals and the making a difference in the face of this seemingly endless cycle of failure and reform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, very cool. I thought this was an amazing conversation, and I hope everybody out there really got a lot out of it, as I did, and I have a feeling you did too, Darin.
Yeah. It's always a good opportunity to remember that you're not alone.
Yeah.
And yes, there's different levels of accountability, and there's different ways in which people are being held accountable.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening to Confessions of a Food Safety A-Hole. Please like, comment, and follow. And as always, thank you so much to all of our new and returning listeners. We really appreciate you. Also, a huge thank you to Bill Marler for joining in on our conversation about accountability today. So, is there anything else you wish to say, Darin?
Yeah, you know what? Imagine going to, and you've been there with me before, going to a production facility, going to a company, and to hear some leader at the company going about their business, singing a song like Caught Red-Handed with the Lab Results. It was me. Emails show how we ignored those faults. It was me. Consumers sick and the headlines loud. It was me. Regulators asking questions now. It was me.
Exactly. I love the anti-Shaggy accountability song.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's kind of making a point here.
Yeah.
I love the fact that I would say the scales are not so tilted any one way. I know people and companies that take complete responsibility and accountability.
Yeah.
And I think about them when I look at the word integrity.
Yep.
If there weren't those people in my sphere, if you will, of food safety and food industries, I don't think I could do what I do. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that that's become those changed lyrics for that song highlights the fact that not everyone is saying it wasn't me.
Right.
It was me.